Hello and welcome to Missional Living, a podcast about everyday people living missional lives. My name is Adriana Melendez, and I'm here today with Will Hanna.
Hello.
So today I'm going to start with missional quote from George Whitefield, and he said, "God forbid that I should travel with anybody a quarter of an hour without speaking of Christ to them." And that's just an element to think about. If we have that missional living, that idea of everything we do, everything we go has an opportunity to share Christ, then if we're spending time with somebody, they should have heard Christ from us. And one thing I appreciate about you, Will, is your job that you just retired from in law enforcement was a lot of driving.
Yes.
And I'm sure a lot of traveling, and I'm sure conversation came up, stood up, and allowed you to have opportunity to either encourage someone, bless someone, or maybe even say, hey, get your life together, or this is not going to work out for you in the end.
Definitely.
But so as we get started, just tell me who you are and what God has done in your life.
All right. So I had some big shoes to fill. My father had the gift of gab, they call it. So he never met a stranger. Anywhere he went, he just was an expert at sparking up conversations. But they were intentional conversations. He always carried gospel tracts with him. And whether we were at the trash dump or a restaurant or just running errands, he'd always find somebody to witness to. So I had some big shoes to fill growing up, watching that being modeled, in my life.
Yeah.
So luckily for me, I came to know Christ at a young age of 12 years old. So you could say I was pretty grounded in the faith growing up as a teenager and a young adult. And part of that is the Great Commission tells us is we need to go out into the world and share the gospel, which can be a challenge at times, a lot of times for us. The result, though, I will tell you, is God has blessed me. He blessed me with a Christian wife who rounds out my rough edges to this day. He blessed me with 2 children, so I get the gift of mentoring them and training them to be the next generation of believers who are going to be leaders. So that's really great. And the other thing is God gives me a purpose. For many years, for 25 years, that was working in law enforcement as a deputy sheriff and as a supervisor, which we can get into that later. Yeah. But, as a Christian person who is managing people, there's opportunities that are going to pop up that maybe you won't have other places. So we can talk about that as well.
Yeah, I think about what I appreciate about your testimony here is you're looking at all the avenues of your life, your family, your ministry, your job, as things that God has interacted with. Sometimes I think we forget that God has given us the whole thing. And I love that question that I ask people, what God has done in your life. I have had so many responses now, and so many of them, the reoccurring theme is like, well, God's given me everything that I have access to, or God did that. And that's such an appropriate way to view our life. And I do think it's cool that God's given you such a great career in one area. I know people also sometimes maybe don't get to have 25 years in one job for many reasons. I think you're also unique because you have a tough job. You had a tough job, and you stuck out for a good time. But
yeah, it's in the book of Proverbs. God says, you delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart.
Yes.
And I interpret that to mean, He will put those ideas in your head about the things that actually are going to matter.
Yeah.
Things I didn't know that I wanted.
Yeah.
Like a family or children.
I totally agree. Yeah, that's good. So when has God challenged you to live missionally?
So quick disclaimer, since we're talking about law enforcement, this might be a little different than anything your listeners are used to hearing. So the people that I typically would encounter in my career were going through like the worst day of their life, or I definitely wasn't catching them at their best.
Yeah.
So they've either been a victim of a crime, so they're angry or they're upset, maybe even traumatized, or as the criminal, they just committed a crime, they just got caught. I think we can all relate to that feeling of, the teacher catches you with your hand in the cookie jar, and that's not a fun feeling. So as an adult, you can imagine. So, it's an interesting career. It's one of the few careers that I can think of where you get lied to on a daily basis.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Multiple times a day. People will lie to the police, whether they're trying to protect someone or whether they don't want to incriminate themselves. So it is a unique
That's true.
job field. Approaching that from the Christian perspective, it can be a challenge to witness to someone when you're in a position of authority. So you're already kind of your uniform itself could put someone on edge because you represent the government to a degree.
Yeah.
And then if there's some sort of criminal activity going on, that might also intimidate them. So it's not as easy to just spark up a conversation. Some folks like my father, he would say that the direct approach would be the best way every time.
Sure.
And I'm not going to discount that. But for me, in my experience, it's more of a long-term game.
Yeah.
Being able to make relationships with people and then they open up to you over time because you've kind of proven that you can be trusted for them to confide in. So, I just wanted to put that little disclaimer out.
Well, actually, I really appreciate that. That has, again, I've been able to interview a few people now. And what you're saying, a few episodes ago, we had some IMB missionaries, even some people that were international missionaries and living in a closed country. And they had a similar take. Like, you can't be outright. Number one, in their area, it's illegal. Number two, people will turn off. I mean, and even if you don't have a uniform, if you just walk up to somebody in any situation, be like, so everything you're doing is wrong. And did you know that? Okay, that's an immediate no. But the developing of the relationships, and God has done that for us by doing things like giving us family members. Those are people that you inherently just start building relationships with, discipling, teaching the gospel. But also those who you get to see on a regular basis. Now, I'm sure your situation is unique because if you see someone on a regular basis and as a criminal, then you're seeing someone on not their best day over and over and over again. But there's even opportunity to then witness or build relationships, even though
that
those
is so
are
true.
unique relationships.
So like, and I won't give specific names, but like there's people that I have encountered over and over again. And even though that I know what they did last time and the time before, and maybe I'm the one who even arrested them, but over time, even through that experience, uncomfortable experience of being arrested or whatever, but they remember how I treated them, and they remember, you're a little different than the last cop who arrested me.
Yeah.
So why is that? And that can open up a gospel. That can open up a gospel presentation right there. Well, I'll be happy to tell you.
Yeah.
So
that's good.
Yeah.
Please,
The big takeaway of looking over my whole career that I noticed is that compared to the 21-year-old who got out there and I was going to save the world and do some good, nothing that I do under my own power was ever going to actually change anyone or fix their problems. Now, I could try really hard and I can make some really great Band-Aids.
Yep.
But I really, I realize only God, only the Holy Spirit, is really going to change someone fundamentally. So I had to kind of come to grips with that early on in my career.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, seeing some of the same people victimized and realizing that actually my efforts aren't doing as much as I thought they were going to do. But then you realize you got to leave that up to God. So I would say the first major thing that I would bring up is preparation.
Okay.
So, and this goes beyond like attending church on Sunday. That's easy enough to do. But if you really want to live missionally, you got to get beyond just, going to church on Sunday and hearing a great sermon, having a great worship experience with music, but then going home and maybe turning that off for the rest of the week.
Yeah.
That's not really going to do a lot to get you into the missional mindset, in my opinion. So like, studying the Bible, getting into a small group of some sort, learning from others how to share your faith, because there are many, many ways of doing that. And some are going to be effective, with different people's personalities than others. And I'd also say the last one is jumping into the, I'd call it the frying pan of service, just doing service projects, whether you're working at a soup kitchen or whether you're handing out Bibles or whatever it may be. It may be a missions trip, which is a huge step into serving. Those are all great ways of preparing you to share the gospel. But again, you have to have that preparation mindset because on our own, we're only going to be so effective.
Yeah.
So as a young cop, one of the first things I did under the idea of preparation was praying for wisdom.
Yeah.
As a 21-year-old, I did not know, so one of the common things as a patrol deputy you would respond to would be a domestic dispute. Go to several of them a day. Well, what is a 21-year-old who's never really had a long relationship going to explain to a couple who's been married for 15 years when they're fighting about finances or whatever?
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, I would pray for wisdom because at that point in time, I was trained to explain the law.
Yeah.
And the law can be very dry and, black and white, if you will. There's no in between sometimes with that. So, praying for wisdom was a huge step for me. And I would also, kind of carry that over with sharing the gospel. I would pray, God, give me the right words to say if I get a chance to share the gospel.
Yeah.
Because, again, I didn't have a lot of life experience up to that point. So the second thing I would kind of bring up was being intentional. God can use us in many ways, and I'm not saying that he isn't going to put people in our lives that we don't expect, but it's important for us to kind of be intentional to start with. Be willing to share the gospel. I would say even pray for chances to share the gospel.
Yeah.
And that's something that I would do, and I still do. I say, please, wherever you put me today, in the grocery store, at the gym, hey, put me in the right place and let me be your tool.
Yeah.
So being intentional is very important. So comparing that to my career, one of the things that kind of jumps out at me is anyone who's had the unpleasant experience of being transported to the jail by me has been subjected to what I call my Jesus jams or my Christian music.
Yeah.
Now that is a very subtle thing, but when you think about it, it can be very powerful. I've seen people who, 5 minutes before they were in my car were wrestling in a mud puddle. I'm trying to get them arrested, and trying to take them into custody. And maybe they're cursing or threatening or whatever the situation. I get them in my patrol car. We're on our way to the jail, but they hear Christian music playing.
Yeah.
And I've literally seen time after time, not every time, but time after time, I've seen people's whole demeanor change.
Yeah.
And it goes from one of, threatening and accusing to literally admitting out loud, I've got to get my life right.
Wow.
I can't believe I did whatever happened today, and, I should know better. Or I've even had, well, you obviously are a man of faith. What do you do? What do you think? And that's a huge, that's not something that you would typically see a police officer interact with someone.
Yeah.
Usually it's,
in that way too, we're always like thinking that opportunities to share the gospel aren't there. But every once in a while you will have someone just straight up ask you, like, well, what do you think about this? And all of a sudden, I mean, either we're caught unaware because we weren't prepared, like you said.
Yeah.
We weren't prepared. So then when that opportunity comes, we go, I don't know. Or you're prepared and God has something for you to say or wisdom to share. But that's amazing. Yeah. The concept of someone being, what do you think?
Yeah.
Because you've just revealed something about yourself that they're now interested to know more about.
And people, we all search for answers. And so maybe this person, they may have resorted to crime out of just they don't know what else to do, almost like an attention. And but then you can give them the correct attention by explaining to them, well, let me tell you how to get your life in order, because Jesus, he is the way.
Yeah.
And I've even seen people, like we deal with a lot of mental health issues in law enforcement. I've seen folks who are suffering from a extreme mentally ill situation. Maybe even possibly, I'm not the expert on this, but maybe possibly demon possessed, just based on their behavior.
Yeah.
But again, you start playing godly music, or there's a godly radio program on, and I've literally seen people like immediately get quiet.
Wow.
And these are people who we could barely even get restrained into a car. And you can call it coincidence, you can call it whatever you'd like. I tend to believe that's God.
Absolutely.
That's God at work.
Yeah.
So you never know what seeds you're planting, when you're out there doing these subtle things. And you don't have to be a police officer necessarily to do this. Where you work at, you may be in a situation where you're allowed to have some music playing in the
Yes.
background in your cubicle, or you could even I've seen like the Christian bumper stickers or Christian
Yeah.
T-shirts, things like that.
Yeah.
Anything that might get that conversation started with somebody is a great idea.
Yeah, we just had someone on the podcast also talking about music in the office, but I was thinking, like, if you carpool, picking up a bunch of kids, turn on the radio to Christian music, turn on your Christian music playlist. Yeah, there's so many opportunities, even for like our students or like our young kids now. Once you get started driving, make a choice of what kind of music you're going to have.
Great idea.
And I know it affects me. I will say, I have more often than not now, I will listen to, I have a worship music playlist. I listen to it every Sunday, but now I've started listening to it every day coming into work. I listen to other music too, and because I'm not condemning anyone for listening to other music, but it has changed even myself when I'm alone in the car, my demeanor and my outlook, and maybe even my focus. Music is such powerful for that.
Yeah. So in my current life, being retired, I'm kind of a dad and an Uber. So I'm like a Duber, I call it. So it's not uncommon for me to have a whole truckload. I got a big truckload of kids going to the ball field or going to whatever their activities are. But every time, I have Christian music playing, and you just never know when that's going to impact somebody, or it's going to, hey, Mr. Will, can we talk about this later?
Yep.
Absolutely. So
good. Yeah.
And I also take that further into my life. There's a verse in Deuteronomy that I'll kind of, subquote it. It's like God saying that the commandments he gives you should be on our hearts. We're supposed to impress them on our children. And it says, talk about them when you walk along the road, tie them as symbols on your hands, write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates.
Yeah.
Now, I literally take that literally as it's written. So, like, when anyone comes into my house, there is 8. I'll put them on some colored paper so they kind of look somewhat organized. But there's 8 Bible verses right at eye level on purpose.
Yeah.
And I have a Lord's Prayer plaque, and there's another Joshua one with a nice quote. But that's all intentional so that anyone coming or going into my house is going to see the Word of God.
Yeah.
And I've actually had some conversations because of it. From, it's even recently I had one where one of the mothers of a child that we were giving a ride to stopped and literally read a Bible verse out loud and said, wow. And I need to get back into church.
Wow.
I said, well, that sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
That's great. So it's funny how God can use something like that for you. So
that's encouraging.
So being intentional, very, very important, I think. A third concept would be displaying forgiveness. This is something that's really huge, especially in today's society. We're really good at fighting fire with fire, getting back at each other. But showing, if you really want to get someone's attention and you want to show them your witness for the Lord and display, Christ, showing forgiveness to someone, it goes against our human nature. It's not natural to want to forgive someone who's wronged you. And I'll share this brief, excerpt from my life. So I had a partner. This would have been back in like 2010, and we had been investigating a series of house robberies, burglaries in the daytime, and it was always when folks were out at work, and we were kind of rubbing our heads trying to just get a lead because we couldn't get anywhere with the case. Well, one of my partners happened to be a new Christian, and I was mentoring him at the time. The best that I could. And, he happened to roll right up on these guys as they were in the middle of the progress of breaking into a house. So he ends up chasing these guys. They run around the corner of a house. Unfortunately, one of them spun around and they shot my partner. Whoa. So he got shot. And even worse, one of the main suspects stood over him and shot him an additional 8 times.
Oh gosh.
So it was a rough day, obviously. Rough 2-week manhunt. Thank God we were able to get all the suspects in custody. But the reason I bring this story up, so here's Jeff. He's been shot in the head several times. Can't return to law enforcement because he's got disabilities now. Praise God he lived through it, matter of fact. But yeah, he he couldn't return to the career that he loved doing, and he was a cop's cop. He loved doing the job. So here's this brand new believer gone through this traumatic experience. The first court hearing that pops up, Jeff stands up, and as a victim, he's allowed to make a victim statement, and he tells the suspects that I want you to know that I don't hate you. And in the same way that Jesus has forgiven me of my sins, I want to let you know that I forgive you for what you've done to me.
Wow.
And he even offered to meet with them in prison if they choose to do that or whatever.
Yeah.
To try to disciple them.
Yeah. Wow.
Wow. I mean, if that doesn't make your blood boil, that's just amazing to me. That's a huge testimony of how obviously he got a lot of heads to turn, including a judge. I mean, they what? He's forgiving them, and so that's a huge thing that we can do in our lives. Maybe not so dramatic, but in little ways. If someone cuts you off in traffic, we don't have to lay on the horn, or if your coworker, I don't know, drinks the last cup of coffee, whatever. But yeah, just forgiving. Showing folks that willingness to forgive. I think that's a huge attention getter. That there's something different about us, and maybe they want to dive into that.
I think often our human nature, again, is anti-forgiving, but also we think it's a signal of weakness. Like by forgiving, we are now weak. And ultimately, the Bible teaches an opposite narrative. It teaches an upside-down kingdom, that the first actually shall be last and the last shall be first. That the greatest being of all time humbled himself from heaven to earth to be the sacrifice for us, to forgive beings that he created. Like, we are such lesser than him. And if we want to emulate Christ's strength, it is through forgiveness. That is a love and forgiveness. I mean, Scripture is very clear that they will know you by your love for one for another. But, forgive others how I've forgiven you. I mean, there are so many elements that if you are a Christian and you struggle thinking maybe forgiveness is going to make me so weak, it is the greatest strength God showed to us. And that is a testimony in of itself. But it does change. It changes people. Like, especially in your line of work. But I think school teachers.
Yeah.
How many rough kids that probably have never been forgiven ever? I know your wife works at a school. I'm sure she meets a lot of kids that just need they just need a hug or attention. And if they're, I forgive you. I mean, there are people working. I mean, if you work in any type of what is it called, where you basically customer service, or if you're at a restaurant and somebody spills something on you, and be like, oh, it's all good. And they're probably recoiling, ready for the rage, and all of a sudden you forgive them and be like, oh, no worries, it's all good.
Even our neighbors, the way that we react to people can be a huge attention getter, and make them realize that there really is something different about us. Yeah. We're not just these weird people who go to our church on Sunday.
Once a week, go to that building once a week. The other thing about that too is then being ready for a response. And what I've heard from you so far is someone might say, well, what is that? What's going on? And you're ready to, well, let me tell you why. I'm not forgiving you because I'm an amazing, nice person. I'm actually forgiving you because I have been forgiven. Your friend did the same. Like, as Jesus has forgiven my sin, I forgive you. And that might also be an element we sometimes forget, that like we only even have the ability to love and forgive because we have been loved and forgiven. And giving that reasoning, that true, solid reasoning for our actions and reactions.
Yeah. So, again, being, showing that level of forgiveness to folks, being intentional. I think about the disciple in the New Testament who he comes across the Ethiopian eunuch, and the Ethiopian guy comes over and he's like, wow, are you studying the Word of God? I want to know all about it. And then he ends up getting saved, and right there on the spot. I think about, how did he know to approach him? Like, what made it? Because he could have just been reading a book. I'm sure there were plenty of books back then. They didn't have podcasts.
Yeah.
But you think about in our everyday life, we can model these kind of things, like praying before a meal.
Yeah.
Some believers, don't really do that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Some might do it, make it a habit. I think that can be a really great thing, and I'll relate that like in my career. Seeing a police officer stop what he's doing,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone knows, there's a lot of danger involved, so you kind of have to be on edge, but sacrificing that and just saying, I'm going to stop right now in front of everybody and say a prayer.
Mm.
I've seen people's lives changed. We respond, unfortunately, when folks pass away. That's something that a police officer would get sent to. Well, a lot of times all we would do is just investigate long enough to make sure that no crime occurred, and then notify a coroner, and then usually we're out of there. Well, taking the time as a police officer to literally ask, would you like a police chaplain to come and pray with you? Or better yet, while I'm right here on the spot, I'll be happy to pray with you folks right now. You'd be surprised how many folks just break down and just,
Wow.
yes, I need that right now. And they're not religious people.
No.
But the fact that someone's willing to, it's that right time, right place. And I have to believe that God puts you there on purpose at
Absolutely.
that particular time. So yeah, that's just something else that kind of stands out to me. The last kind of thing that I would kind of want to point out would be showing compassion. So we have forgiveness, and that's one thing, but compassion. So many cops would respond to whatever the situation is that they're sent to handle, and they'll mediate that problem, or they'll do whatever they need to do according to the law, and then they'll leave. From a management perspective, that sounds like they did a great job.
Yeah.
But from a Christian perspective, I kind of look at things like when Jesus would go from town to town, the first thing you see him do a lot is meet needs, clothe people, heal people, feed people.
Yeah.
You meet their needs first, and then we're going to have that conversation. So like I try to make it a point when I was doing my career, I would make it a point to kind of look at the big picture about what's going on. I don't know, what's an example? So let's say I went to some simple neighborhood dispute. One neighbor's upset about the other neighbor putting a fence on his side of the property line, something like that. You have, Deputy A would go over and just explain to them to go talk to a magistrate, and they'll fix it. And how about stop yelling at each other and that?
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. But like me, I would dig a little deeper, ask a few more questions, maybe pay attention to what's going on. Just from that simple effort. I mean, I've uncovered child abuse instances, elder abuse instances. I mean, even mental health issues that weren't being addressed, and folks didn't know how to ask for help. But all because you're just digging a little deeper and actually listening to people about what the big problem is, instead of just trying to Band-Aid the problem and go away. So not knocking my fellow law enforcement officers, but that's just when you're intentionally trying to serve on mission, that's going to be in the back of your mind,
When you've mentioned before in the past that yes, there's an idea that the criminals you're coming to, people who've just committed a crime or being victims of crime, don't know God, and so it makes sense. I mean, we all think bad people do bad things. If you don't know Jesus, you're gonna do bad things, and that might not always be the case. But then the other side is those who are enforcing the law. Are law enforcers, they're that, quote, good people or trying to uphold the law. But if they don't have a relationship with God that compels them to passion, then they're not going to go that extra mile. They're going to stick to the law and move on. And while God has allowed lawmakers and lawgivers and law keepers, he also allowed grace. Now, we all know we also want justice. That's why, and God is a perfect God of justice. So we're not going to be able to balance, grace and justice and mercy like he can, but we can, in those instances that are appropriate, show that compassion. And it has to stand out. It has to be something that stands out for sure.
There's many instances that I, was involved in where justice was served, you could say, and legally everything was great. But I find myself, reflecting back saying, I don't really feel like we really helped this person. Or they're still not in a great position. They're just not in any danger anymore. But that doesn't really, it just felt like we didn't really go as far as we could. Stopping off 2 weeks later to talk to the little kid in the poorhouse and maybe giving him that teddy bear. Or, I've even had an instance where I had a shoplifter, and yes, he broke the law. Okay, he stole his I don't know, $3 beer or whatever. I just went ahead and paid I had $3 on me, so I paid the fine for him right there. Paid for his beer that he stole.
Yeah.
And explained to him, like, you could have gone to jail tonight.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm paying this fee that you owe for you, and I'm giving you a warning, but I want you to understand why.
Yeah.
Because Jesus did the same thing for me.
Yeah.
By forgiving me of my sins. And it's like I say, if you're really on mission and you're looking for those opportunities, you'd be surprised how they can just fall right into your lap sometimes.
Yeah, that's so true.
I could share like another story,
Yeah.
kind of related to that. I could probably tell lots of stories actually. Years ago, I responded to this 911 hang-up call. Now, I'm dating myself because I know most people have a cell phone now, so there's no phones being knocked off the hook.
Yeah.
But back then, that was a common call. It happened many times a day. You'd have someone call 911, not say anything, and hang up. And all you do is just to make sure that everything's okay at the house, and generally everything's going to be fine. Or maybe a child's playing on the phone.
Yeah.
So I went to one of those calls one night, and this man answers the door, and he says, "Oh, oops, it was an accident, and everything's fine. We're good." And I'm like, okay. Now, legally, I could have left, and that would have been that. There's no liability for that or whatever. I had actually kind of snuck up to the house, as I would make a habit to do, and I was listening before I knocked, and I could hear a woman crying, really crying. And I could hear a man yelling. So it sounded pretty rough. And I think I'd even asked, if there was anyone else in the house, and he said, no, just me. So I kind of knew he was already lying there. So, like I say, kind of thinking about the big picture here.
Yeah.
I noticed the guy, as we were kind of having an interaction, he subtly kind of locked the screen door without me noticing, he thought.
Yeah.
So I knew that something was going on there. So I was able to talk him into giving me his ID, because I told him that there had been some burglaries in the area. So I want to make sure he lives there, and he fell for it. So I checked him, had a records check done on him. As he turned around, though, to get me his ID, I noticed that there were some broken things in the living room, and I could tell that there had obviously been something going on there.
Yep.
So now I'm going to have to come inside.
Yep.
So when I told him I'm coming in to check, he immediately gets this 1,000-yard stare and very calmly tells me, if you come in this house, I'm going to kill you. And this is one of these stories, I might lose you here.
Yeah.
But I immediately felt like this presence.
Yeah.
And I can't explain it. I'm getting excited just even telling the story. So it's like I could hear someone, not an audible voice.
Yeah.
So this guy didn't hear this, but I could hear someone like literally yelling almost Joshua 1:9, be strong and courageous.
Yep.
The Lord is with you wherever you go. So I literally, but if you study like the police procedure, this would not be the thing to do. It would be to back out and call for backup and do something else. I immediately kicked the door open. Me and this guy start fighting.
Yeah.
And like I said, he's already told me he's going to kill me. So unfortunately, this fight goes to the ground, which is even more dangerous.
Yeah.
Police officers carry a lot of tools on their belts and all that. Thankfully, I'm able to get him subdued. As I go to handcuff this guy, it took several minutes. This went down. I had not been answering my radio, so the dispatchers had put out a distress call for me. Well, the reason they had done that is when the records check came back, this guy was a convicted cop killer.
Whoa.
Had a huge violent record. Like, they knew this guy was bad news.
Wow.
And in that instance, I just felt like, wow, like, thank you, Lord. Like, but again, I can't forget, and it all happened in just a split second, but I felt like this presence and, almost like the Holy Spirit just telling me, go in right now, just get this done. Thankfully, the lady in the situation, we were able to get her out of there. She had been basically treated like a slave. Had been beaten over a long period of time. And she was too scared to ask for help.
Yeah.
So in that situation, I feel like, God was able to use me because we were able to get her out of that situation totally. And so it's amazing how God can, again, these are stories you probably don't typically hear on a podcast.
Yeah, but and I'm sure people are thinking like, well, I don't have opportunities to kick down doors, but honestly, I can think of a time that even when I was interacting with someone, I felt encouraged to share my testimony. Like, share that hard part of yourself that you hadn't shared yet before. Or you see someone new and maybe you're not you don't like people, or you're not really bad at talking to people, and say, hey, come sit with me. Like, there are other moments that God is very encouraged us to be brave, but you also don't know when's that opportunity that God's maybe going to call you to go into a harder job, to go somewhere where nobody else is a believer, to go to a country where no one else is a believer. Like, yes, my job right now doesn't include kicking down doors, but in a way, sharing the gospel is that element, and that's why Moses told Joshua, and God told Joshua to be strong and courageous, because he's already prepared the way for you. You just have to go through it. Now, similar to your story, it might take some scuffs and bruises and bumps.
Yes,
I'm not saying it's a smooth road.
That was not a fun night for me at all.
No.
That was pretty scary.
That's very scary. But the trusting in the Lord and stepping forward, that is something anyone can take away and learn from. Absolutely.
Yeah. We there's like I say, there are several events throughout years, and this wasn't every night now. I don't want you to think this is a TV show where you have action every night,
Yeah.
But over a long 25-year career, there were several instances where I really truly felt, I believe, the presence of God getting me through a particular situation. And when you go through something like that, or even when you just come to the realization of what Jesus has done for you, I mean, it's you can't back down from that ever. That's going to be a part of you throughout your life. You're going to have to tell somebody about that. You're going to have to be a witness. It's there's a situation. This would have been somewhere in the mid 2000s. I was in an unincorporated part of Mount Pleasant, and we were investigating a call about a woman who was walking down the road firing a pistol.
Oh, okay.
So, a little hesitant
dangerous,
there.
Yeah.
So my partner and I get in the area, and we're doing what we can do to search around, and we could hear some gunshots, so we're kind of doing our investigation. It ended up leading us down like a wooden trail in some woods. And we're being slow and cautious, but there's only so much you can do. Yeah. And they don't teach you all this stuff in the police academy.
Yeah.
So, but as we walk by, I hear a click, click. And if you're familiar with firearms, you know what that metallic click is. Someone pulling a trigger. And I turn around, and this woman is literally just has the gun pointed right at me, and she's pulled the trigger 2 times. So we got her into custody and got everything safe. She'd actually was suffering from a mental health episode, didn't even know where she was, didn't know what she was doing, which is good that I didn't kind of, like I say, digging deeper into the situation.
Yeah.
Taking her to jail wouldn't have been the right answer.
Yes.
You're not going to fix the problem.
Yes.
And then it might even get worse later. We were able to get her some mental health treatment that day, so that's good. But the reason I bring this story up, it's a little off topic, but just about how amazing, the Lord is.
Yeah.
So I checked the 2 bullets.
Yeah.
They had the indentions where the firing pin hit the bullets.
Wow.
So scientifically, there's no reason why those bullets didn't fire and I got shot. And it just, I got goosebumps just telling the story again, because I was there. I mean, I lived this, and it's like, wow. I mean, and you can call it coincidence. You can call it whatever you'd like. Again, I tend to believe that was God's divine intervention.
Absolutely.
It wasn't my time. He has something else for me to do. So
yeah. No, I agree with you. I mean, and it's also encouraging. Again, I don't know if I'll find myself in that particular situation, but it's encouraging to know that God really does have the believer. And so if something's happening, God has you. And if something's not happening, God also has you in that. Yeah.
And these situations, again, these aren't things you typically might hear listening to the podcast. But even in your everyday life, you don't have to be a police officer to encounter miraculous things, in my opinion. Like, I had a friend of my wife's, not my friend. This was a friend of my wife's, and we were a young married couple. This friend of hers was not churched. She was not a believer. She tried many other avenues of life, but not that. We get a knock on our door one night, and she literally says, "Can I talk to Will for a minute? I know this sounds a little strange." And I'm like, "Sure." And I was assuming it was asking for maybe some police advice. And she's like, "Well, I know you're a religious guy, And I really got a lot of problems in my life right now, and I understand that I'm not getting it done. I'm not getting things right. Can you explain to me what it is that you believe and why you believe it?
Yeah.
And we sat down, and literally in 5 minutes, we went over the Romans road, the verses, and and she prayed a sinner's prayer, made a profession of faith on the spot, and did a complete 180, turn in her life. Those are the kind of things that can happen to all of us. We can be a part of that if we're willing to share the gospel.
Yeah.
And to me, that's more powerful than any of these, war stories I'm telling you about law enforcement, because it's just watching someone literally change. That's something only God can do himself. And it's amazing to see that.
Yeah. I was reading in 1 John, I think Philippians also has it, but it says something like, we're sharing this with you so that our joy may be complete. And it really just reminded me that the fullness of joy in God is not just experiencing salvation, which is a huge part of it, and his sanctification, but it's also sharing the gospel. And what you just said, when you get to interact with others and you see their life change, you now experience the fullness of joy because you have now been a part. You weren't the one who saved them, but you are now an element in their story, and that really is encouraging. And we can be so discouraged in so many ways every day, but hanging on to those moments where we see someone come to faith, someone's life change, even someone who knew God but was actively turning away, come back. That's amazing. I mean, it's really remarkable. But that experiencing that joy being complete when you are obedient to the opportunities God gives you to share the gospel.
And I'd say, even later on in my career, I moved into management, so I was supervising. But even in that opened up a unique opportunity because the people who were working with us, I could, when people make mistakes, I could have easily just, yelled at them or screamed at them or whatever, which is kind of the norm in that kind of line of work. We're a lot of type A people. But, calling someone off to the side, counseling them, and even explaining to them, look, this could really mess things up, but maybe giving some advice about how to do things better, that opened up opportunities to share the gospel because they're like, wow, I'm not used to my boss being so nice about this. Even when you have to discipline folks, when you show them that, unfortunately, I'm the boogeyman. I have to give you this write-up, but I want to show you how you can do better. And when you do that opens things up because that's just not natural for most people to do.
That's so true.
So if you don't have to be a police officer. If you're a teacher, you're in a big mission field or a healthcare worker, but no matter where you're at in life, just this is the way that we interact with those around us. We can draw that attention back to Christ. So.
Absolutely. You have anything else for us as we close?
No.
Nice. Well, is there anything we can pray about for you for now?
I've been retired for a year now, and I have been, God's put me on a path of kind of being a sports coach. That's one of the big things I'm in the middle of right now. So I would say just pray that I can have that impact on the youth that I'm around and I'm serving with, and that, God could use me to witness to those, lost folks there.
Nice. Well, I hope you found this conversation encouraging, and as you go, be in the Word to change the world.